Hi there everyone, welcome back to STEM Lockdown Digital School. This is grade 12 IT and I am Lalani Lagranzi, your presenter for today. And today we're going to look at the supplementary paper written in May-June of 2019, question 3. That would be your OOP question. So first what we need to do is always to look at what was given. And as you can see, there were attributes given as well as a constructor method and an incomplete toString. So this is one where we are going to add to the toString. And there were also two accessor methods given. Now, important is that you keep that in mind when you go to question 3.2 so that you use these methods that are given. So if we have a look at the attributes that were given, we have an ID, and it's a unique number. We would expect it to be an integer number, but we have to check because it could be string. Name obviously would be string. Hours could be an integer number, but if you have a look at the given code, you will see that it's actually real. So it is important to go and see what has been given and what the data types are. And the sales amount, as expected, was a real value. Now we'll start with question 3.1.1. Press pause and try it yourself. In here we have to write two methods. The first method is telling us that we're receiving a value as a parameter, so we know we have a parameter, and nowhere does it say that we are returning a result, so therefore it would be a procedure. If you look at the wording of question 3.1.1b, it looks the same. So we're receiving a parameter, we're updating the attribute sales. These two are both mutator methods because we're making change to the attributes of the class. Now, if we have a look at update sales, my procedure, I have indicated that the p hour parameter is real so that I match it with the attributes that was declared there as real. And that's the same for update sales. I do recommend that you just do one method at a time, press Ctrl-Shift-C, and then code that method. So for this procedure, we're receiving the number of hours, and we had to add it to the existing number of hours. So we're making a change there to our attribute fHours by taking the existing amount and adding my parameter. The same goes for your sales, the update sales procedure, also receiving a value and updating my fSales attribute with the amount that I'm receiving from the parameter. So now try to create the method and complete it for qualifies for bonus. For 3.1.2, press pause and try it yourself. So we can immediately see that this method is a function because we're returning a value and the data type of this function is Boolean. So it's either going to return a true or a false. Make sure that when you have a function that returns a Boolean value, that both true and false will receive a value. Now the trainee will qualify for a bonus if they meet both of these conditions. There is no mention here of receiving a value, so it won't have any parameters. So you would use the fHours and fSales as the attributes of your class to calculate whether they are qualifying for a bonus or not. So here is my function qualifies for bonus, returning a Boolean value. And then I make sure that my function will return a result of either true or false. So I'm starting with false, and if they meet both conditions, I then change my result to true. Remember, your result will match the data type of your function. So this should be either true or false because my result data type is Boolean. And the hours had to be 15 or more, and the sales had to be 1,200 or more. Make sure that you include these two values with the equal sign. The wording in the paper says that it must be at least 15. At least means that 15 is included. Same goes for the sales. At least 1,200 means it is included. The final question for 3.1 is to complete this toString that was provided to display the output as explained in here. Where they have these little brackets around values, that means it is your attributes of your class. But note that you do have to include round brackets there, and inside the round brackets you'll give them the ID, which is also an attribute, and then the wording in between as well. So for the result of the toString, they just gave us the front part here, and we now have to go and add the brackets, the field trainee ID, which is an integer, so remember to add your into string, attended, the hours, and take note of the number of decimal places that you have to show. We had to display 2 decimal places, and then the labeling there, and then again the F sales, which we would want to display as a rand value, so you have to add FF currency, 2 decimal places, and a full stop at the end. You should save your program often while you are coding to prevent data loss if the power should go off. But this is a good time to save and run your program. You won't get any output, but at least you can sort out any syntax errors. So once you have completed your question 3.1, you then move over to your main form, and typically the first question, 3.2.1, would be your instantiating of the object. You will see that the code has been provided to extract the name from the combo box, as well as getting the ID selected by the trainee, and these have been stored for you in variables. The word extract really means get input from the user and store it as a variable, if that was part of the question. Then we have to use these variables to instantiate the object, and we have to make the next button visible. Press pause and try it yourself. Before we go to the main form, the constructor was actually given in question 3.1, and it's important to take note of the order and the data types of the parameters that it needs to receive. Also how many. So the top part here is the given code, and you need to add your code below where it says question 3.2.1. To instantiate the object, go to where it was declared, copy out the declaration of the object, and then paste it in here. Add an equal sign to create an assignment statement, and then add your .create. In this way, you won't forget how to instantiate your object. This is very important, since if your object is not instantiated, you'll get no output for this 40-mark question. So there I have my constructor create, and what I need to remember in the brackets is I have to match the arguments that I send it here, these are my 2 local variables, with where the constructor create was declared, and I need to match the arguments with the parameters in NOD, number, order, and data type. My constructor only needed 2 arguments, and then I need to make sure that I'm sending it in the right order. The trainee ID had to go first, and then the name second, and the D stands for data type. So the first parameter was an integer, so I have to send it an integer argument. The second parameter was a string, so I have to send it a string argument. And then just the code to make that next button visible by setting the visible property to true. Now in this next button, we have to look at the text file, and we have to read through the text file. We have to find the right ID number, and then we have to test for T or S. So T would be training, and then if it is training, the value here is hours that we have to add. And if it's an S, it's a sales line, and then we have to add the sales value. So this is question 3.2.2, and we're going to write code as explained in here. We want to check if the file exists, and then display a message and exit if it does not. If the file does exist, then we're going to read from the file. And we need to extract the ID and see if it is found in the text file. But very important is that you make sure you use your getID that was given code in your class to determine whether you have found the person for who the object was instantiated at the moment. You then had to test if the line had a T or an S, and then call the correct update procedure. And this is really where your while loop stops, And after that, you need to clear the output area and display the toString, and also set the next button to be visible. Also take note that you have to display a message if you don't find this ID number in the text file. And here is an example of output. And here is the final example of output. This question is worth 18 marks. So try it yourself. I'll show you the memo soon. Just before we start with 3.2.2, I want to remind you that this getTraineeID was provided code and that you needed to use in your while loop. So first part was asking us to test if the file exists and display a message and exit. Just remember your begin and end when you're using this. Exit is allowed when you're using it in an if statement, but not if that if statement is inside of a loop. You may never use an exit inside of any loop. Then our usual assign file and reset to read from a file. And I have to have a Boolean value set to false, so that after the loop, I'm able to display whether I have maybe not found this person at all. Then my normal while loop to read from my text file. I don't want to stop it once I find this person, so I haven't added and be found as true because there are multiple lines with the same ID number. I've just copied 2 lines from the text file for you here so you can understand what you are doing. I do suggest that you do the same in an exam. If the lines are very similar, you could just copy out 1 line and just place it as a comment inside of your while loop so you know whether you have to find the semicolon or the hash or whatever else comes next. So currently one of these lines will be stored in S-line using my read line. And I'm going to find the position of the semicolon first to extract the number, which is the ID number of the trainee. And remember, we want to use then copy and from Y1 to IPOS -1 because I don't want to copy out the semicolon as well. If I do, my program will crash because I can't string to int it with the semicolon there. So now I have iCode stored as an integer inside of iCode. And I can compare it with my getTraineeID. getTraineeID was also an integer, so I would be able to run this if statement. This is now seeing if the line I'm reading at the moment belongs to the person who I instantiated the object for. Now I will change beFound to true, just for that output at the end to say whether the person has not been found. And here I am just finding the hash, that is IPOS, and if I go to the line at character IPOS -1, I will be either at the T or the S. And if the value is a T, I am then deleting the line. So what I'm doing is I'm deleting all of that I'm highlighting at the moment, and I'm left with just the number at the end. And I will then use that number, which is now stored in S-line, changing it to a real value, and calling my objects update hours for T because that was for the timelines. So in here, I will have to change this to real because remember, update hours was a procedure that needed a real parameter. So I'm sending it a real argument. Also remember, update hours was a procedure and therefore not part of another statement. It just stands on its own with a semicolon at the end. If it wasn't a T, I will then also delete the value, but then I will update my sales value because that means that the value is either T or S. So then it would be sales, and I'm adding the value of the sales to the current sales as the attribute of the class. Here you can now see the end of the blue if statement and then the one for the green if statement, and this is the end of my while loop. Very important to remember to close your file. Then we were required to clear the rich edit, and if I have not found this person, I will display a message the trainee is not registered, and I will make this next button invisible. If they have been found, I'm going to display my toString. Remember, a toString must always be called as part of an output object or maybe even stored as a string variable, but it can't stand on its own. So here we're calling it inside of the rich edit. And then I make my next button visible. So here's the last question of question 3. Try it yourself. I'm just going to scroll down so you guys can see the example of output. There is what you need to do. We already displayed the toString, so we just need to add this line at the bottom. Make sure that you test your program with the example of output for Cody and Tyrone. Try it yourself, press pause, I'll show you the memo soon. This was a very simple button. We just had to call our object's qualify bonus function. This was a Boolean function that you wrote in question 3.1. And I have not put in equals to true because we don't really have to do it. It's not wrong to add it, because an if statement will test if a Boolean value, whether it is a function, a property of an object, or a variable, is true by default. So those two lines will mean the same thing. And if they do qualify, I'm just displaying a message at the bottom of my rich edit to add to the bottom of below my toString, and else I say they do not qualify. So hopefully this helped you. So that was another example of a OOP question. Before you watch the next video, I would like you guys to do question 4 of the same paper. Remember, you can download it from education.gov.za. So thank you for watching Grade 12 IT at STEM Lockdown Digital School. Remember to follow Africa Teen Gigs on Instagram, Facebook and Twitter, and also find their YouTube channel if you search for Africa Teen Gigs. Hope to see you soon.